You're listening to Very Spatial Podcast, episode 769, September 14th, 2025.
Hello and welcome to our VerySpatial Podcast. I'm Jesse.
I'm Sue.
I'm Barb.
And this is Frank.
First, some news.
International Geomagnetic Reference Field Explorer has recently been updated for 2025 to include the years from 2025 out to 2030. It's a spatial tool that you can use. Pretty cool, from the British Geographic Society, that they are the ones who maintain this tool. And it was a very short release. It's been released on social media and on their website. They just say, here it is. We've released the new World Magnetic Model 2025 and left it there for everyone to explore.
Geomagnetic aspects of what we do underpin so much of what we do, but it's one of those things that, in my experience, GIS people don't know much about. Like, I think they get exposed to it at some point in their educational career and they go, oh, yeah. And then they don't think anything about it after that, at all, other than pick a datum. But I think it's nice to have tools like this so people can think about them and visualize them and understand them.
Well, it still plays a role in surveying. It plays a lot less of a role for those people who are just relying on GPS and GNSS all the time, because it doesn't matter where your north is. It's just where the device says you are. So I think that's why we've lost a lot of it, because orienteering, of course, and even now with total stations being largely GPS driven in terms of where they are, as well as your back shooting, you don't need the compass direction quite as much. I don't know. It's important, but more ignored.
I mean, the thing, I think it kind of somewhat, that's what I was trying to combine those two words inadvertently, depicts the I'm going to use the word ignorance we have of the fragility of GNSS. I think, like GPS, we use it for everything, and there's nothing to keep in administration at any point going click. Okay, it doesn't work as well as it used to, and then suddenly we have to go back to other methods which are very viable and still work, but being a little bit, I don't want ignorance is not the right word, but a little bit unfamiliar with that now it's unfortunate. So I think it's important for us to remember there are other options out there and there are other ways of approaching this and they're useful. So that's all I really have to say about that.
While there are some natural interferences with magnetism, it's more likely to keep working if you're being spoofed, because we're seeing a lot of spoofing and jamming going on, especially in the around Russia areas.
And, even if you get rid of the political aspects of all of this stuff, or, you're in the middle of nowhere, sometimes you just don't have a signal. So being in the wrong canyon, in the wrong woods, having something else to rely on helps.
Orienteering.
Yeah. And I say that fully as somebody who is not expert at that by any stretch of imagination.
Researchers between Stanford and universities in Italy have used GeoAI and machine learning to uncover hidden earthquakes that, they since the 80s, they knew about some of the workings of what was going on underneath this volcanic mountain, but this gives them more proof of exactly what the inner workings are, to better respond to any issues that might arise. And, this was working with seismic activity, and it gives them a clearer view of what is actually happening underneath the earth. And, it was all done with machine learning and AI, which is helping us to, quickly understand things that before would have taken a lot longer to analyze.
It's kind of interesting. It's what is it? 4 times as much earthquakes as they thought. And there's been a lot in the last 8 months alone. So, that's important to know, because what is it is, I'm trying to remember how, is it aftershocks often predict a bigger future shock? Is that, there's a rule of thumb there with earthquakes, and I never remember what it is you have a bunch of little shocks and then, that may be being a big one, or the other way around. So being able to detect those would be very helpful in detecting if this is going to be a significant earthquake or not.
Well, and also I think it was really interesting where they were able to see a clear pattern of a sort of ring fault. And that's one of the things too, is being able to accurately map so many earthquakes, or all the earthquakes that are occurring, helps you understand the fault system that may be at play. So that's another important thing, as well, as to try to better understand kind of where the activity is happening, so that you can understand the subsurface structure a little bit better.
And they also talked about how because they were able to observe that pattern around the caldera, they were able to see that the land would change, rising and falling, which is something a lot of times we think mainly about one singular event, but this is actually, constant change.
But that's it for the news.
So this week, our web corner is kind of a book corner, and it's just a cool book. It actually came out at the end of last year, but is sort of making the rounds on the media end of things, and it's called McAtlas. And it's essentially an atlas of the world's McDonald's, but it's a little bit more than that. I think even the author himself, or in discussions about it, refer to it as a visual social anthropology. And I do think that has a lot of validity, right? Yes, it's a fast food global giant. Yes, you think about it kind of breaking down or homogenizing maybe food cultures in different places. But in reality, there's also a lot of adapting that goes on. And if there was a series a number of years ago, I think we may have mentioned it even on the podcast, called Fast Food Gone Global. And one of the restaurants they looked at was McDonald's. But just first of all, amazing photos, some of the photos out of this book of the various places, so that even the landscape around it kind of has the cultural adaptation. But anyway, I just thought it was a kind of a cool sort of social look at food. And even though we have a lot of global trends, there still are cultural elements that get injected into it and give you something unique for local regions.
It's very fascinating to me, the companies that don't do this well, that don't do what they're talking about and saying, okay, we're making a product that is local bound and it's supposed to be for the local market. And there's dozens and dozens of famous examples of this, of, naming a product that the translation in the local vernacular or even language is a bad word, or, says it's a piece of junk or something like that. That happens a lot, but it's really neat to see when you've got a company like McDonald's that does it well, that gets that you have to think locally, even if you're acting globally in marketing.
And see, I was going through the book I was looking for like maps and things, but also you're right, the photos are just amazing, but just the book itself, it looks like a McDonald's hamburger. It's got the sleeve that looks like that. It's just totally embraced that in terms of its whole design for its discussion.
I did the same thing, by the way, is that the very first thing I was like, where is the companion mapping site for this? And there isn't one. I was very disappointed in that, which is why it started out. It was like, well, this could be the web core. There must be a map that goes with this. There was not. Hint, hint, maybe a companion website in the future that has that for it. But yeah, I remember it because when I used to teach world regions, I actually utilized Fast Food Gone Global. And again, there was interesting quotes at the various McDonald's and other places about, the sensitivity to cultural traditions, the food that is in specific places, right? And there's all kinds of, I guess, fan groups that go and try McDonald's in different parts of the world to see the items that they have. So I think it's really, really interesting and kind of a cool book project.
This week, we're going to step away from the daily grind to talk a little bit about the fun stuff.
Ooh.
World building. We talk about it occasionally. It's time to come back around to it, right? It's time to figure out, the technologies we're using to build these video game worlds, these times that we're sitting around thinking about the concepts that we're going to build into our books that we're never going to write about fantasy or science fiction. All these things about creating the geographies that will hopefully be a basis for something that will or will not exist, but at least make us happy as we're building them for ourselves or enjoying the worlds that others have built. So, is anybody building a world right now? Do we want to kick this to Frank or Sue on this one?
I'm not exactly building a world right now, but, well, technically, yes. So we're playing a game that we both like, Barbara and I both like, called 7 Days to Die. And the interesting thing about this game that it's basically a zombie apocalypse. You have to survive, all that sort of stuff. It's a little bit like Minecraft in if you think about it that way, in that everything in the world is destroyable. You know, you can do things to it, you can manipulate it, all that kind of stuff like that. So it allows you to literally build a world if you're of the mind. Even though the world is populated, you can just reorganize it the way you want to, if you're, again, of the mind. And it's kind of interesting because I haven't found many games that are capable of doing that. And I think what I find interesting about it is most of the games are, I'm trying to think how I articulate this succinctly, so I'm not going to. I'm just going to say it, and it'll be a bit messy, which is most games have to have that narrative, have to have that story piece of it, right? Otherwise, it's not really a game. It's just an engine. And most games end up falling, in my experience, more on the narrative to say, okay, I need to restrict your ability to do world building because I need to keep the narrative moving forward. I need to keep that cohesiveness. And it's kind of interesting how much the technologies have evolved in such a way that they don't really support that level of world building that a game like this can do, that you can destroy every pixel on the screen and reorganize every pixel on the screen. They are like, well, no, we're not going to let you do this stuff over here because that takes too much processing power. We're not going to let you do this stuff over here because we don't really want to do the art about it. And so I'm finding that fascinating, the lack of free true world building in games lately. It's much more constrained world building.
So actually, I was thinking about Sue the other day just because they said they had I think it's the 30th anniversary of Tomb Raider. And I was reflecting on, one, how hard it was to jump in Tomb Raider. And then like later on, they started to add, the orienteering and weather impacting you. And you had to pay attention to all those facets of the real world within the video game world.
And say, just to preface, this is a video game, not the movies. But.
Yeah, the video game. And then and that was one of the first games I knew of that had added that, temporal and weather component. And then in some of the world building games that we've been using, like Valheim, where you can build things, they also add in physics where a log can roll on you and kill you or maim you, and weather where the wind is actually blowing and impacts how things happen. So it was just something that made me think about Sue when I saw that announcement because of the Tomb Raider.
Yeah, so the many, many inspirations that ended up being the body of work that I do. I've actually rediscovered in a time sync kind of way as I have. So every fall I teach a class on video game worlds. And one of their jobs is to actually build a small world to tell the story in. So it's on spatial storytelling, environmental storytelling, but the concepts of world building, right, are the things that we focus on. So those things that once you get started, you realize you have to add more and more and more sometimes, in your mind to make something compelling, and how you do that. And as part of it, I give some examples of games that really do it well in particular ways. And so, Frank, you're absolutely right? Because there's the choice. Do I just let people wander around my world, whether it's detailed, whether it's, kind of cartoony, whatever it is, or do I guide them with a story? And that means I can focus more on the things that they're actually interacting with, and the stuff in the background can be, kind of nice and slow or whatever, because it's not relevant. So there's a lot of technical things that the students learn related to that, but it's also great for me because every year I have to come up with examples to illustrate. And one of the things I did is go back a little bit to the Elder Scrolls, it's a popular game series, and Skyrim was one of their more famous ones, and people still get into Skyrim and play it a lot because you can mod it and there's all kinds of things going on. But they actually recently remastered Oblivion, which was the game prior to that, I believe, in the series. But I mention this because in my world building questioning, I've gotten sucked back into Oblivion, which I am able to compare the graphics and the gameplay and all of that, the mechanics, as, being of a time quite a while ago. And yet it still compels me to where I sink hours and hours into this game, and then come back to the questions. Why is it, right? Why, when I can recognize that the graphics aren't as as state of the art as we can do now. That things might be stilted. The dialogue is hilarious in its simplicity, but yet 2 hours will go by and I'm like, what have I been doing? Running around this world and whacking on things so I can get more gold and buy a house in a town kind of thing. And it's really interesting to just have those feelings like, why am I in there? And, when people experience these worlds, because then it comes back to my actual work. So how do I replicate some of those things that make people want to stay in there in the stuff that I'm doing?
Yeah, and Sue, I can relate to your going back and what sucks you in and that nostalgia, because it's around this time of year that I start to feel nostalgic for the old World of Warcraft. And sometimes I will log into the old version just to get that feeling, even though it really does not work as well. Sometimes you're like, that's what I want to experience again, is to get back in, even though I don't have the time to spend on a multiplayer like that.
And that kind of brings you back around to Frank's first example of a thing that sounds to me like what Fortnite was promised to be, but then, of course, became something else. Is that kind of what it is? The original promise of Fortnite, that you could destruct and construct to stay away from the zombies?
I think so, yeah. I tend to liken it more to Minecraft in that everything is, editable. Is that the right word I want to say? I don't know.
That was kind of the promise of the first trailers of Fortnite, and I was really excited. And then, of course, it became what it is, which is awesome for Epic Games. But
it is, and technically it's not done yet, but it's been in development for at least 10 years, if not longer. And it was released in early release like 10 or 12 years ago or something like that. So they're still evolving it, and they in fact are evolving their own game away from that Minecraft-y thing and more into narrative-driven experiences, which has created a lot of controversy within that particular subcommunity, and that there are people who want that world building. I just want to make my little worlds, my bases, and have the obstacle of the zombies, and that's what I want to do, versus the people who are looking forward to this more first-person shooter-esque dungeon explorer type of approach to the game. And it's interesting to me that intention almost always, Fortnite's a great example, where they said, we need to limit this somehow. We need to place some bounds on this, either for narrative purposes or for technical purposes, or both.
And I think that happened to Fallout 76 as well, that you could go in and you didn't have to interact with any really of the NPCs that weren't like really talking to you or anything. It was a more open game, and then they decided they needed to add that in. So it was sort of a shock to almost be in a silent world to a world that did have more of those guardrails on you and what you could do.
Well, and I think that's the dilemma, right? So when you start doing this, is if you start with the world, then you have and what you have is exploration, right, as a key motivator. Then you always have to have new things, because if you want someone to continue to visit the world, there has to be things for them to do, right? They have to continue to explore. When they get to the end, well, then they're done. So that's a constraint on a world, just open world building, right, as a reason to have that world. On the other hand, right, if it is too story driven, it's the same thing, right? I go from point A, B, C, and then I'm done. So what's my compelling thing to come back to it? And so some mix of it, right, some guidance combined with exploration seems like it should be the magic bullet, right, to create something that everybody's going to like. But that's the reality. Not everybody's going to like everything. But that tenseness, it's tough. So right now, as an example, I'm working on a long-term project that I've had to upgrade several times as newer versions of technology came out to do things I wanted to do. And in my current sort of planning and upgrading, my biggest problem is that it's essentially a journey. And so how much of the journey do I put in, though? Because after a while, the journey is kind of boring. Like in the real world, this pilgrimage in Japan, right, is a lot of walking through very similar looking landscapes for great distances, and then it'll change landscape a little bit. But the reality is that, it's a lot of traversing between things. So how do I balance wanting to be able to see the whole island of Shikoku, if you will, with, hey, we need to get to 88 temples. We have to do it. And so what's the balance in between there? And I've gone through 3 or 4 different models to try to figure this out with the available technology. And every time I settle on one, I'll get people to try a little piece of it and like, yeah, well, okay, so this part's good, but this is super boring. And I wandered off here and couldn't find my way back. So as I look at different examples and continue to see what's coming out, that's kind of one of the things that's always on my mind is what are the games, what are the experiences that can do the balance? Because that's ultimately what I'm looking for.
And what's interesting to me is some of the games I know of that do the balance well tend to come up and then be unique. You don't see anything that can replicate sort of the feeling of what they've done. And I'm thinking of Firewatch, which I really enjoyed and actually was realistic enough to be used as examples for real world people that are doing, Firewatch type work and being outside like that in a national or a state forest, and haven't seen anyone else that's developed something like that for those of us that liked Firewatch. And it's getting to be an older game, but it's still the only game like that you can play that gives you that balance of realism and a sense of that journey with challenges in it. But it is a little bit of a super sad story.
Well, the challenges with video games, right, is the fact that they're trying to sell a product and then, it's not make a product profit, retire forever. They have to make another one and they have to make another product moving forward. And so I'm not sure how much of the balance they worry about. It's just about getting people compelled through the narrative or through the experience, and then saying, okay, well, there's something else that you'll buy, down the road. It's you should enjoy this thing as opposed to, it's one thing to rule them all, as it were. It's not dissimilar to a novel. Like you read a story, you've read the story, great. You can continue to read other stories in that universe. In the case of a series like, Tolkien or whatever it may be, or it can be, read a different world. And so I think there's always going to be that endpoint for the experience. And that becomes really challenging. Is how do you know when to sunset your world? I guess is what I'm saying. How do you said, I've said everything I need to say about this world.
Well, I think that's a debate that goes on. So for studios and a world, so The Last of Us is a really good example, right? One where the world is amazing and immersive, but the story is definitely the thing that drives it and drives your exploration through it. And so they're built as self-contained episodes almost, right? So sequences, and they do have a definitive, hey, this is how I ended this one, which has led to a lot of debate going on, right? As you see that migrate into another world, into the world of television, and what do we do? Because in TV, we like more seasons if we like something, or, kind of other things like that. But then you have stories that are within a universe that people say, yeah, but I'd like to hear about this character. I'd like to do this. And the world is set up such that I think the best, most compelling worlds are worlds that you think time moves on and things happen in this world when I'm not there, right? They feel so real that you can imagine. And we actually have, and this is a little bit of a side thing, but, we have people who are fans of these different worlds who go on and create works based on them. So there's a whole thing called fan fiction out there that feels that world is so compelling, and the characters that are introduced within it, that they continue on and think about the other things that might be going on. And
become series onto their own.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that's one of the real amazing things about world building when it's done well, and like all the examples. And every time I play a new game, or this summer I played one that's gotten a lot of popularity. It's called Clair Obscure Expedition 33. And it came out of nowhere, for me anyway. I'm sure other people were expecting this and following it. But a compelling world building, although the actual overarching world was typical RPG in that you couldn't necessarily see it. You went into little sections of it, so that, again, that's kind of navigate around and then go into a level, if you will, and complete some actions. But well built and a very innovative story that was compelling for its small details, and So that's an example of one where it's a world where in theory other things could happen because of the backstory that they had for it. And so those are ones that kind of make me go back and say, how can I do something like this a little bit better? How can I make my world in such a way that I can have pieces of it to it that I can add on or update or things like that? So I think that's part of the interesting question too in building these worlds.
One of the things that's both nerdy but also would encourage other people to do is we've played multiplayer games with other geographers, and it's always fun to have a geographer's perspective on a world when you're trying to do things together. And in this case we're playing Raft, which is again one of those games where you both make your world and it's on the ocean. So was a good idea, because then where is the end of the world? Well, it's the ocean. So it gives you a different perspective to bring in all your geographic knowledge, and if you do serious games, the gaming knowledge as you try to play a game together.
So, there are a lot of things we could talk about with world building moving forward, but this is sort of where we're at right now. It's very video game centric. We didn't mention other, alluded to things like series, Star Wars being a very dominant world that was built on a very gem of an idea and then grew from there in an amazing amount. We could talk about books and things like that. I just finished last night a book called The Cartographers, which was a story built upon a really interesting, weird story in the real world that they made a fiction world around it. I won't say anything about that other than it's an interesting little story. So you can check that out, but that's certainly something that's done in a novel form a lot. Fantasy, I was going to say almost every, but I think I can safely say every fantasy book is building a world of some form or fashion that's completely fictional, and that's kind of interesting. So there's a lot of world building stuff we can do and a lot of stuff we can talk about, but that's sort of an update thing on world building.
On to the events corner. As always, if you'd like us to add your event to the podcast, send us an email at podcast@veryspatial.com, because we don't have any this week.
If you'd like to reach us individually, I can be reached at sue@veryspatial.com.
I can be reached at barb@veryspatial.com.
You can reach me at frank@veryspatial.com.
I'm available at Kind of Spatial, and you can find all of our contact information over at veryspatial.com/contacts.
As always,
We're the folks from Very Spatial.
Thanks for listening.
We'll see you in a couple weeks.